When it comes to VA disability ratings, most veterans are primarily concerned with the rating they get, whether that is 50, 70, or 100%, or special monthly compensation, what have you. But there's actually something more important than just the rate, and that is the effective date of the claim. Hi, I'm Andy Gross, Law Office of Andrew P. Gross, and today I want to talk a little bit about effective dates because I've mentioned them before and they're a very complicated subject. In fact, so complicated the VA gets it wrong all the time, and it's a big part of what we do at my law firm is to help veterans fix the effective dates of their claims so they can get more back pay. So what is an effective date? An effective date is the date your claim becomes effective. Rather, it's the date that the VA will pay you back to once a claim is granted. They can't pay you before the effective date because that's the first date that they would have been paying you had you been granted on the day you applied. In order to illustrate this concept, I'm going to talk about a fictional soldier that I just made up off the top of my head. We're going to call her Angela Airborne. Her parents named her that because they themselves were members of the 82nd. So what did she do? She enlisted into the Army and chose the 82nd Airborne Division because that's where her parents met. She enlisted in the Army on August 1st, 2012 and did a 4-year term until July 31st, 2016. Remember these dates because they're going to come up throughout this explanation. She served exactly a 4-year term, and on one of her last jumps at the 82nd Airborne, she got tweaked her knee a little bit. And she didn't think anything of it. She was tough. So she just kind of went on with her life. She got off active duty and went on to do other things. So let's talk a little bit about effective dates and the basic rule. The basic rule with effective dates is this. The effective date is the date you file the claim, or the date the disability first arose, whichever comes later. But it's really important to focus on the date of the filing of the claim. Let's say Angela Airborne got out of the Army July 31st, 2016, but she was busy and she didn't file her claim for disability until August 18th, 2020. 4 years after she got out. A couple months go by. Eventually, in December of 2020, they grant her the benefit, 10% for her bum knee. What they do first is they pay her 4 months of back pay, back to the date she applied, which is that August 18th date, 2020. That's the basic rule. There are some exceptions to the basic rule where you can actually get an effective date prior to your application. These are kind of uncommon, but they are more common if you apply right away after you get off active duty. And here's why. One of these rules is if you apply either before you get off active duty or within 1 year of getting off active duty. So let's say Angela Airborne applies sometime between July 31st, 2016 and July 31st, 2017, within 1 year. This rule states that they will backdate your claim until the day after you got off active duty. So let's say Angela Airborne gets off active duty July 31st, 2016. She's going on to college, she gets a little bit busy, and she finally does the paperwork sometime on her Christmas break in December of 2016. She does the claim December 2016. Sometime in April 2017 is when they grant the benefit. They will actually go back past that December date all the way to the day after she got off active duty, August 1st, 2016, and set that as her effective date. What happens if she waits till, say, August 2nd, 2017? Well, if she waits till August 2nd, 2017, that becomes her effective date. So again, if you're getting off active duty, it's important to apply for the benefit within 1 year of getting off active duty to get the backdated all the way to the day after you got off active duty. Another example where the veteran can get an effective date prior to the date they apply is when there's a liberalizing rule. Let's say Angela Airborne deployed to Iraq during her time in service, and now she's developed asthma or some sort of other respiratory condition that is now presumptively granted under the PACT Act. On August 10th, 2022, she's watching the news. She sees the news about the president signing the PACT Act into law, so she immediately goes on to va.gov and applies for asthma as a service-connected condition. Now, mind you, she hasn't applied for it before, but it's important on August 10th, 2022 is when she applies. It takes a while for the VA to process these new PACT Act claims, so it's March of 2023, and she finally gets a positive result back from the VA, and the VA grants the condition with a 10% rating. Because she applied on August 10th, they make the effective date August 10th, and they pay her back all the way to August 10th, 2022. What if she waited, though, until March of 2023 to apply? It's still within 1 year of the law change, so she's going to get the effective date all the way back to August 10th, 2022. Even if Angela Airborne waited until August 9th, 2023, exactly 1 year short of, 1 day short of that 1 year after the effective date change, so 364 days after the law change. If she applies on that date and doesn't get the benefit granted until December of 2023, they're going to give her back pay all the way to August 10th, 2022. This is why you've probably been getting emails about the deadline to apply under the PACT Act. It's not really a deadline. She can still apply on August 11th, 2023, but her effective date isn't going to be August 10th, 2022. It's going to be August 11th, 2023. Now, the other way, commonly thought of as a way to get an effective date prior to an application, is what happens when you file an intent to file. When you file an intent to file, that's a signal to the VA, and you can do that easily by going on va.gov and starting an application or filing the proper form. You signal to the VA that within 1 year you're going to apply for benefits. If you apply for within 1 year filing that intent to file, the VA will go back to that date that you actually filed the intent to file. Again, this is common. It's a good idea if you're thinking about filing, but you're just not ready to sit down at the computer yet to do it. Go ahead and get those intent to file in and finish the application within 1 year. Set a reminder. Effective date gets really important when we're talking about appeals. In order to maintain an effective date through an appeal, and we know the VA gets things wrong all the time, so oftentimes you'll have to appeal. What you'll have to do is continuously pursue the claim. That's official VA language, continuously pursue. And what that means is that within 1 year of a negative decision, you appeal to keep the claim going. Let's give an example. Angela Airborne files for her knee problem on, let's say, March 3rd, 2020. June 15th, 2020, the VA says, sorry, Angela, no dice. Service connection denied. She immediately files a higher level review later that month, later in the month of June. They're going to give her the effective date all the way back to the date she applied. Let's change the facts a little bit. Let's say she applied in January of 2020. She gets denied in March of 2020. She files a supplemental claim in June of 2020. Then she gets denied again in July of 2020, and she files a higher level review in August of 2020, and the higher level review finds a duty to assist error in November of 2020, and they do another exam, and then finally in March of 2021 they grant the benefit. She never waited more than a year to do any of her steps of appealing, so they will grant her that disability benefit all the way back to the original application date, which is January of 2020. It gets wilder than this. If you filed a Board of Veterans Appeals claim, let's say she got denied again in March 2021, she filed a BVA appeal, and that BVA appeal took 2 years, and now it's March of 2023, and the BVA grants it. That March of 2023 grant will go all the way back to January of 2020, so like 3 years. It's a big deal. Now, what happens if Angela Airborne sits on her denial, right? So she applies in January of 2020, she gets denied in March of 2020, and she waits until June of 2021 to appeal. Well, she can't use the Board of Veterans Appeals or the higher level review anymore. She can only file a supplemental claim with new evidence. So let's say she files a supplemental claim in June of 2021, more than a year after the denial. If it then gets granted, the earliest effective date she's going to get is June of 2021. This is why it's so important to appeal. I've been talking about different effective date rules and different appeals rules. These are still some of the very basic rules. I'm about to step it up a notch. It's going to get even more complicated. There's something that I call the Service Department Record Rule. It's found at 38 CFR, or Code of Federal Regulations 3.156C. That Code of Federal Regulations rule says that if the VA was supposed to get a Service Department record and they didn't, and is later associated with the file, you get that effective date from the initial claim. Let's look at Angela Airborne again as an example. Angela Airborne, she applies, let's say August 15th, 2016, 2 weeks after she got off active duty. The VA denies it in December of 2016 because they didn't have all the records for whatever reason. Well, let's say we fast forward 3 years. Angela Airborne kind of gave up for a while. She didn't really think about it. But then she realizes, wait a minute, there's a whole medical record from her deployment that never got associated with her file. And she goes back to the VA and says, hey, VA, go find that medical record. And this is 2020, 3 years later. She reapplies in June of 2020. And in June of 2020, this new medical record gets added to the file. And then let's say it gets granted in September of 2020. The VA should give her the effective date going all the way back to the initial claim in August of 2016. This is a very powerful rule, and the VA screws this up too sometimes. They might accidentally only give her that 2020 effective date. So she's got to step it on an appeal and go in order to get that effective date to go all the way back to 2016. Again, the Service Department Record Rule found at 38 CFR 3.156C can be very powerful. We don't see that so much nowadays, but we do see it in some of the older cases where the Department of Defense was still using paper files, right? Now with digitized records, it doesn't happen so much. But it doesn't stop there. In the words of your favorite infomercial guy, but wait, there's more. It gets even more complicated, all right? There are some situations that only apply to legacy claims. If you recall, the Appeals Modernization Act took effect in February of 2019. Before that, if you had a rating decision, it was called a legacy decision, and a whole separate pile of rules applied to that. If the VA received new evidence in your file, after a legacy rating decision, within 1 year, the VA was responsible for issuing a follow-on rating decision that was responsive to that new evidence to determine whether it was new and material. Did this happen very often? Not really. And this gets really complicated because recent court decisions have held that this included VA medical records. Incredibly complicated, incredibly tricky to navigate, especially because veterans don't really have access to their complete claims file. With that in mind, I don't want to get into too much detail about this because it is a multiple page brief that I've had to prepare to the courts, and it gets very tricky and complicated running through a list of court cases. Legacy claims can get very complicated. By the way, there's something called the Pending Claims Doctrine. The Pending Claims Doctrine is actually kind of simple when you think about it. It starts off simple, but gets more complicated, like most things with the VA. The Pending Claims Doctrine says that once the VA receives a claim, they have to make a decision on the claim. Simple, right? Well, sometimes the VA will receive an appeal and just not do anything about it. That claim is pending until a decision is made. I had one case where a veteran filed an appeal in 1996, and when I got the file in 2020, I saw this appeal just sitting there, and no one had done anything about it. So we called up the VA, and the VA goes, yep, you're right. We got to do something about it. And they actually processed the appeal for this veteran and went all the way back to 1996. It was pending all this time. There's also something called the reasonably encompassed claims doctrine. And this you see when you have a condition that is, that if I am a veteran and I write down diabetes on my claim, that reasonably encompasses some of the secondary conditions of diabetes, like peripheral neuropathy and diabetic retinopathy. So again, that is reasonably encompassed in the claim. Another example is that if you write down on a claims file sleeping problems, that might reasonably encompass sleep apnea or insomnia. Sleep apnea and insomnia are totally different things. Sleep apnea is a physical problem that involves the closure of the airway and stopping breathing. Insomnia means that you have some sort of psychological barrier to actually falling asleep. The reasonably encompassed claims doctrine, many varieties of how that can work out to get an earlier effective date. Now, how we actually crack open the claims file and get to the earlier effective date depends a lot on the individual claim. I can't give you any bright line rules in a video on YouTube, but I can give you some general ideas as to how these earlier effective dates work. So what's the takeaway to all of this? It's actually quite simple. First, if you have a condition, apply. Apply early. And if you get a decision you don't like, appeal it. Even if the VA gets the effective date wrong and that's the only thing wrong with your claim, don't sit on that decision. Appeal it when you can, as soon as you can. Go to a VSO or an accredited attorney or an accredited claims agent and they can help you appeal the claim. Don't use a claims consultant. Claims consultants base their fees, illegally mind you, on a future payment. They don't care what your back pay is. They don't care whether it's 3 months or 30 years. They don't care because they're going to charge you either a fee for their educational products, like the stuff I'm recording on YouTube right now, or a fee based on the increase of your disability rating going forward, not going backwards. So Don't use a claims consultant if you're concerned about getting an earlier effective date. If you've been struggling for a while to get your VA claims off the ground, look at an attorney, a VSO, or an accredited agent, someone who is trained to look through claims file and look for these things. If you have a case where you've received a rating decision that has an effective date that doesn't look right, and it's fairly recent, something that we can appeal, give us a call, see if we can help. Until next time, take care.